Hello. So, hopefully this recording will help you with lecture 4, which, as you can see in your lecture notes, goes from page 13 to page 22. Also, the reading for this subject can be found on Moodle in block 6 on Moodle, so some of these sources I'll be referring to in the course of this recording. So, lecture 4 is entitled The Search for a New Ideal. As we've mentioned in lectures and seminars, in the 1960s, the rehabilitative ideal was what the probation service and various parts of the criminal justice system were working to. But there was dissatisfaction with this, and a search for new methods of disposal began in the late 1960s. So basically what you're getting here is the start of the alternatives to custody debate. So when you're looking at the second paragraph in your notes, you can see that we're making the point that the advisory council, which we'll talk about in a minute, was looking at changes or additions to the existing range of non-custodial sentences. However, the Wootton Committee, moving down a couple of lines, extended its remit to investigate alternatives to custodial sentences as well. So the alternatives to custody debate arguably started around this time, and it is something that you're going to need to be quite well aware of for your assessment in this module. So their fifth recommendation was for the thing that we now know as community service, and the most important thing at this point is to note the optimism that the advisory council had for this form of sentence. It stands out as a clear contrast with the nothing works argument, or the nothing works debate, which was soon to arise. Also, the language that was used by the advisory council was also very different to current policy, as we can see at the on page 5 in the beginning of the advisory council, they used the phrase which has been emphasised on the text. It was an imaginative and hopeful. So imagination, hope, optimism, these were all words that rarely are present in policy today, and also back in the late 60s, early 70s, very different to the nothing works debates that was about to happen. The advisory council on the penal system, that's how you refer to them, but they're also known as the Wootton Committee. This was one of the elite kind of organisations that used to have some influence around that time, but as we've discussed before, this is the kind of elite organisation that no longer has this kind of influence within penal policy. So the Wootton Committee were very optimistic about community service. They felt that it would have reformative value. Now, their justification for this was largely based on the view that the offenders would benefit from working alongside volunteers. So very much a fact of having mixed kind of groups of people working on community service, and in doing so, the Wootton Committee believed that the offenders might acquire the wholesome influence of volunteers. as opposed to the contamination of custody. So to avoid potential contamination of custody type factors, it was deemed important that offenders would work not in groups solely of offenders, but in groups with volunteers as well. So that was, as I say, an original intention. And Baroness Wootton herself went on to say that having offenders and volunteers working together was to try to enable the public to appreciate that the purpose of compulsory work in the terms of community service was not about humiliation or punishment, but to promote social responsibility. Now, this form of treating offenders or a different type of disposal was clearly based on reparation, and the idea of reparation, the idea of giving back to the community, of restoring harm, has said to be the most important thing about community service, in that it was a new dimension, rather than punishment or rather than rehabilitation. This reparation was a new dimension. And according to Hood, Roger Hood made the point that reparation and community service ideas of the Advisory Council, or the Wootton Committee, was the apotheosis of the post-war attitude to offenders. So an apotheosis is a pinnacle, a high point, and so community service exemplified this idea in a different way of dealing with offenders. However, a problem for this new approach was its need to compete with prison, and basically Hood was of the opinion that the lack of evidence from prison sentences, i.e. a lack of success, this was one of the reasons that drove this new dimension, and it drove the need to find an alternative, because prison sentences were not providing any evidence regarding their potential success. Now, Young then added some other potential reasons as to why community service was pushed forward, and he cites reasons such as growing humanitarianism, which was a feature in the late 1960s, a recognition of the harmful effects of prison, but also economic factors as well could have had an influence. So it's financial reasons as well as humanitarianism was driving this desire to find alternatives to custody. However, your lecture notes also say that dissatisfaction with standard probation was also a possible reason as to why community service was being pushed. And community service itself was seen as something that could stiffen probation. It could toughen it up, or as what Tony Vass said later on in 1984, when combined with supervision, it can be a probation order with a sting. So that kind of idea of toughening up probation was also felt to be an important factor. The Wootton report wished to see, like we said before, offenders and volunteers working together. They also give evidence of the tradition of voluntary work in the UK as also a reason. They call it a deep-rooted tradition in the UK, and gave various examples of how volunteers have worked alongside offenders, and various examples which gave the Wootton Committee some confidence. And it is important to note at the bottom of page 14 that the Advisory Council, if it wasn't for them, it would be very difficult to imagine community service being the way that it actually was. So they had this influence, the Wootton Committee, and it says at the top of page 15, their optimism is clearly out of sync or incongruous with nothing works. Despite their enthusiasm, the Wootton Committee provided little evidence to justify these hopes. Similarly, there was a lack of international examples as well which would support their enthusiasm. So this lack of evidence or this lack of comparisons makes it an interesting question as to why the sentence became so popular. So there was, as I say, little evidence, little experience to build on, but it subsequently became available for a vast array of offences. Now, even though we've been talking about community service as an alternative to custody, so an alternative to high-end or high-tariff sentencing, it soon became apparent that the sanction of community service became used in, as I say, in many, many different cases. Now, where community service was in the tariff, where it fitted in relation to other sentences, was it a high tariff or was it a low tariff measure, was a problem in community services early years. Now, the government were keen for community service to be used as an alternative to custody, so as a high tariff measure. However, it became apparent that for many offenders, they were being diverted from non-custodial penalties. So in other words, community service could be used as a replacement for a fine, as well as, for some people, as an alternative to imprisonment. So we've got a situation here where the sentence is being used differently for different people. So, as I say, the government wanted it to be used as an alternative to custody. They seemed to want that, but in many cases it didn't happen, and community service was being used as an alternative to fines as well as an alternative to prison. What you're seeing here is possibly the beginning of net widening and the beginning of penal excess. Now, in terms of the justice of this inconsistency, there is a problem in itself in that some offenders are receiving it as a replacement for a non-custodial penalty for a low tariff thing, and others were receiving it for a high tariff measure. So obviously that's questionable in terms of justice, but also this caused problems for defendants, and also if they were to appear before a judge or magistrate who viewed it as a high tariff measure, this then could cause problems if they actually received it as with judges and magistrates who saw it as a low tariff measure. So there's severe problems in terms of consistency was a problem for community service. Now, why these problems occurred arguably was to do with the chaos in the initial proposal. The original proposal arguably caused this inconsistency because the Wootton Committee, when they put forward who they thought it would be suitable for, well, you can see in paragraph 37 that they didn't do. As it says there, they did not. We have not attempted to categorise precisely the types of offender for whom community service might be more appropriate. They considered whether it should be restricted to imprisonable offences, and they do say that would be the their general wish, to see it as an adequate alternative to a short custodial sentence. However, the next few words, we would not wish to preclude its use in less serious offences. Then arguably that was one of the reasons why community service then became imposed for a vast range of offences. Sometimes instead of a short custodial sentence, other times in cases where imprisonment was not going to be an issue. So Kempes refers to this as a masterpiece of studied ambivalence. So in other words, if something's ambivalent, then there's a contradiction.